Welcome to Geared for Growth. I'm your host, Mike Mortlock from MCG Quantity Surveyors. Today, I'm joined by Jessica Giandomenico to talk about what's happening in the Brisbane and Toowoomba property markets after the latest budget changes. There's been plenty of noise around negative gearing, first home buyers and where property goes from here, but what are buyers and sellers actually doing now that the dust has started to settle? We get into how investors have responded, why some first home buyers are reassessing their plans, and what's changed on the ground for people trying to buy and sell. We also talk about whether recent price movements are a sign of a downturn or just a market that's finally taking a breather after a pretty big run. For investors, the challenge is separating the headlines from the fundamentals and working out whether a cheaper property is actually a good buy or just cheaper for a reason. Let's get into it. Jessica Giandomenico, thank you for joining me on Geared for Growth.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, we are in a post-budget world. If you're living under a rock, you may have noticed that these changes were legislated on the 26th of June. So, like it or not, the rules of the game are no negative gearing on established property post 1 July 2027. But it's been a big shake-up of the snow globe. Now, you work in the Brisbane and Toowoomba markets. Starting off, what was the first reaction from the people that you're chatting to day to day?
Definitely we're seeing investors sitting and waiting. So obviously these announcements came out for the budget and then they had to reassess exactly what they were going to do, how they were going to structure things and if and how they were going to move forward. So investment, we saw a change immediately, but to be honest, we probably saw that change with investment from March. Where people really started to sit on the fence. There was obviously a lot of leaks about this budget. So really from March, we saw that investor market really slow down. From the budget, completely quiet. So that investor market stopped immediately. Now, in regards to owner-occupiers, obviously since March, having a bit less competition has been a really good time for them, especially first-home buyers. But since the budget as well, we did see a lot of uncertainty in the market that slowed down that owner-occupier space as well, which in reality, it's a really good time for owner-occupiers, really good time for first-home buyers. But we did see a lot of probably lack of confidence to move forward and just unsure what to do.
Do you think pre-budget it was purely the leaks, or was there a little bit of war in Iran, cost of living, interest rates that sort of had people on the sidelines as well?
Yeah, I think there was quite a few things happening all at once. So obviously we had the budget leaks, we had the war in Iran, fuel prices went up, we had an interest rate rise, and all of those things combined, like one of those things affects the market anyway. Like we've seen it anytime we have an interest rate rise, we see lower numbers at open homes. So having multiple large-scale things happen at once obviously really affected the market to a greater scale. So we're seeing it for a longer period of time now.
Yep. And you're operating in, I would say, two fairly competitive markets at the moment that have seen some really serious price appreciation. What was that giving a pre-budget window of lack of competition, or was it still pretty tight even though some people were electing to sit and wait?
We were definitely seeing less competition from March. So for that owner-occupier first home buyer market, instead of competing with, say, 20 other offers, or even going to open homes, we weren't seeing, 30 to 50 groups at a townhouse or a unit. We were seeing maybe like 10 groups maximum. We're seeing, 2 or 3 other offers. So it did really change that landscape for owner-occupiers. It meant that we could be a lot more competitive in our offers, and sellers were a bit more flexible in that time. However, that's now changed again to, we're probably seeing it on a larger scale now.
Yep. Yeah. So post budget, we're 3 weeks post budget, I suppose. We're nearly a week after definitely legislated? I mean, obviously the Liberal Party said the first step is that they'll stop it, and in a couple of years they'll repeal it. But these are the rules now. What's the
Yeah.
sort of feeling at the opens and in communicating to the different cohorts, whether it be first home buyers, owner occupiers, upgraders, or downsizers, and the investors at the moment?
I would say still for investors, it's been pretty quiet. Obviously, the details have come out now, so they're still in that phase of getting everything together and seeing what's going to be the best strategy for their investment. A lot of investors were hit with, say, investors that I work with, which are first home buyers, so rent vesting. A lot of them they did have quite large implications because of negative gearing. They were using that to get into the market. So that obviously affected their borrowing capacity. So they're now trying to pivot on what to do next, or how to actually get into the market, or what market's going to work best for their new budget. And so we're still seeing that sort of in progress, but I would say post-budget definitely quietened down for the first few weeks. And now just in this last week, we're seeing owner-occupiers come back into the market. We're seeing open homes get that little bit busier. Nothing crazy yet, but we're seeing more first home buyers out, downsizers are out, like out at open homes. So there does seem to be that confidence back into the market. However, people are not making quick decisions. So they're going to look at properties on the Saturday. They're still considering it a week, 2 weeks later. They're not making that quick decision that we were seeing at the start of the year, where you'd see the property on the Saturday, you'd be getting offers sometimes in that day, or signing a contract on the Monday. So it's a very different landscape now, and people do have a lot more time to think about things. And the offers that we, when we're talking to agents, the offers that we see that buyers are putting through are quite cheeky, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. There's always people out there looking for a
Yeah,
bargain, and the media is certainly helping with that narrative, because we've got 1 month of core logic or Cotality data, and everyone's just calling it a downturn. Brisbane actually, according to Cotality, saw still an increase in the June figures, but it's hard not to argue that that's a decrease in the pace of growth.
100%.
It's been a market that's been performing for a long period of time. I mean, what are we talking? Nearly a 3-year upswing, or perhaps even more. At what point are you sort of looking at it thinking, okay, well, we've got to be looking at the top? I mean, outside of the budget, maybe putting a pillow over everyone's property price face.
I think we were definitely getting to that point. Like there was so much heat in the market. It was getting so competitive. And like I said, I work with a lot of first home buyers, and just the price points were just getting almost impossible to get into the market in locations where it's convenient for them to work and live and not give up too much stuff. And obviously, a first home getting into the property market, you are going to have to make some sacrifices. However, we were seeing that to a much larger extent. So I think we were at that point where something needed to happen to enable people to get into the market. And I think that's the period we're in right now, where, yes, people keep talking about, there's going to be a big crash. I don't see that happening, but what I do see is this opportunity for buyers now, for those first home buyers, for people buying on their own. That's been really, really tough to have a single income and try and purchase a property. For young families with dependents, like all of these demographics have really struggled through. So now I see this opportunity that we have right now for that owner occupier market to actually be able to get in, to be able to, put in conditions into the contract to be a little bit, less risk on them, to have longer finance terms or whatever they need to put into that contract. Sellers are actually being a lot more flexible. They're becoming a bit more reasonable. They might still list a property that is way too high, but it is interesting how quickly that comes down now. So instead of leaving it on the market for a month before they're having any kind of, price reevaluations, that's moving quite rapidly. And I think that agents now are kind of, are in line with the market and trying to move those things through quite quickly.
Yeah, and if I know sellers, it's not because they want to be reasonable, it's because the market is forcing them to
Well,
be
typically, they're
reasonable.
also trying to buy in this market. So,
Mm.
somebody selling, their family home, or they're trying to upsize or downsize, or just move somewhere else. They also need to buy in this market, so they're sort of understanding in that owner-occupier space what's happening. So, I think that's where it's becoming a little bit more reasonable, and they can see that on the other end, their purchase transaction, they're also saving a bit of money right now. So I think they're sort of coming to the party, and I think that's what happens in a market like this where we're stabilizing, that buyers and sellers can work together a lot better than what we have seen.
Yep. If we take a bit of a step back, you talked about working with first home buyers, and we don't talk a tremendous amount about first home buyers on this show because it's a property investing show, but that is where there is a little bit of a parallel because the rent vesting pathway, I think, was really kind of undersold as a genuine way that first home buyers are getting into the market. I'm sure that the politicians were saying, look, that's not a meaningful sector, but you've already mentioned that that was a pathway. And of course, the federal government did have the ability to potentially cap negative gearing at one or two policies, which I think is even something that they leaked. They decided not to go through that. It sort of begs the question, do you feel like that actually has really stopped first home buyers from having one of the levers or one of the abilities to get a bit of a leg up and get into the market?
Yeah, of course. I think that negative gearing, that rent vesting pathway for first home buyers was a really legitimate way for them to get into the market, because we've worked with a lot of clients where, yes, that's exactly what they're doing. They might be living at home, they might be in a share house, but in order for them to buy a property, it's not going to be somewhere that's feasible for them to live, as in it's too far from work. They're having to be too far from family and friends, and it's just not a thing that they want to do. However, they can buy an investment property and start to build, start to get growth from that property, build that equity to buy their first owner occupied property. So I think it is something that was maybe overlooked a little bit for first home buyers, because that was a legitimate pathway for them. And I think a lot of first home buyers have been affected. We've spoken to a lot that was their strategy. It's now not. And we're trying to put together what they can do next. But we've heard of some people that got a contract signed just after the budget announcement, rent vesting strategy, and they send it off to their mortgage broker, and the mortgage broker is like, so sorry, you cannot finance this property now because your borrowing capacity has dropped by $250,000, or obviously everyone's going to be different, but it has made a massive impact on what they can actually do.
Which begs the question to me, and of course you've got to sort of check your bias at the door, and I'm a property investor, I work with property investors. Less investors in the market is not necessarily good news for me, but also property prices growing at 10% year on year for 100 years I don't think is good for society. But for someone that's maybe less connected to the investor upside like yourself, working with first home buyers, I mean, compared to me who doesn't work with first home buyers, I'm interested in your thoughts on whether you actually think this policy helps first home buyers or it's missed the mark. The Geared for Growth Property Investing podcast is presented by our business, MCG Quantity Surveyors. If you're an investor or a property professional looking to get the best tax depreciation deductions for yourself or your clients, please get in touch with us at mcgqs.com.au. It's our mission to help as many property investors as we can to maximise their claims and maximise their property education as well.
Look, I think that's a hard one, because I'm an investor myself, and I think, like you said, it's not good for society for the market to just keep going up and up and up, as much as we would like that for our own properties and for our clients' properties. And at some point, like I said, it has to stabilize to give people opportunity. But I think on one hand, you've got, yes, I think it's done exactly what the government said, whether that was their pure intention or not. It has opened up the market to first home buyers. It has given, people with single incomes an opportunity. It has given that owner-occupier market opportunity now. However, I think, like we said before, they've also not thought about the other side of those, where a lot of first home buyers are investors, and it's reduced their ability to get into the market. And I think also when these things happen, as we know, the media takes hold of everything. Everything's got to be terrifying and scary, and that's what sells. And I think that's what's also hurting the market a bit right now, is because so much stuff is coming out about, even say yesterday, I saw multiple reports from various from various media, where they were saying, Brisbane's dropped, and it hasn't. It's gone up 0.3%. That's not a lot. That's a very stable market. But to say it's dropped, people then have in their heads that it's crashing, and that's a bit of it's scary. So I think maybe some things weren't thought through quite well, but it has made a huge impact on the market. So yes, there is opportunity to first home buyers. Do I agree with all of it? No.
Yeah, and I think that's a very measured response. But to maybe push on that point and perhaps be even more of a devil's advocate, for the people that were encouraged to get into the market with a 5% deposit that was brought forward from 1 January to 1 October, that's a very high LVR. We're talking about 5% drops in the particular market that they purchased in. They're into negative equity. And then you also, let's just say the first home buyers now who maybe are buying at the bottom, it's great that they've got that home, but their future capacity to generate wealth and income is diminished, and not just with property, with capital gains tax changes, with the negative gearing. It's a lot harder to hold an investment for a first home buyer that maybe wants to get their first investment property. And it's also not just property, right? This policy of helping first home buyers get into the market, I'm confused as to how changing negative gearing and CGT for the stock market, for example, helps that aim. Do you think, firstly, do you agree? And secondly, do you think that first home buyers who are maybe excited that, okay, we've got a chance now, understand that maybe they're robbing Peter to pay Paul? They've got this initial flash in the pan success, but their upside potential has been maybe hit by a sledgehammer?
I think that is 100% right. And it's almost like, and I think this has been the discussion a lot lately, where we've all benefited from all of these things. We're not first home buyers anymore. We have benefited from all these policies that we've had in place, and now it's the first home buyers that are copying it. And the growth that we've seen over even the last 6 years since COVID, we're not going to see that now. So it's now more important than ever for first home buyers that are getting into the market to make sure that they're buying the right properties, they're getting the fundamentals right, because, in the last few years you could buy something, still wouldn't advise it, but you could buy, a B, C, D grade property, and you would make money off that, and you would make money off it relatively quickly. Now it's so important to get that first purchase right, because we're not going to see that crazy growth that we've seen over the last few years that has just been so rapid, and you can just buy something, make money off it, jump to the next one. That's going to take a lot longer. So it's getting that first purchase right is going to be the most important thing. So that might take a little bit longer to find that property, but that's going to be the most important thing.
Yep. Now, I do want to ask you about that property and what that looks like. And we were talking before about it's maybe not great for society if property prices go up 10% each year, but there is a way that the government could perhaps stop that from happening, and that's contributing to the supply. The 1.2 million homes would have been a good starting point, but instead of 240,000 a year, we're talking 170 odd. It doesn't seem like without huge reforms, we're likely to see a meaningful increase in supply. So that makes me believe the long-term fundamentals of property as an investment class are still there. It's just being able to stomach those losses for the years until hopefully it becomes positively geared. Do you still believe in property? And if so, what do you call an A-grade investment purchase with the market we've got right now in the
Yeah.
areas that you are active in?
Well, definitely still believe in property. I would be crazy to be a buyer's agent and not. I wholeheartedly believe in property as an investment. I think it's one of those, it's that bricks and mortar, you can touch and feel it. As an investment class, I think it's one of the most solid that we have, although we do get these market cycles where it all gets a bit overwhelming for a lot of people. And so definitely believe in property as an investment. It I think as far as those A grade properties, what we really need to focus on now is convenience, that location. So say if we take Brisbane, for example, we are on a river, so Brisbane floods. So that has never changed in Brisbane. We need that location to be flood free because the weather's only getting worse. We're getting worse and worse floods. So location, that needs to be solid, but also the convenience and that lifestyle accessibility. It's not so much, you have to be right in the inner city because that's sometimes not where people want to live. And there's quite a few demographics that, don't suit that. But it needs to be convenient, it needs to be accessible, it needs to be close to amenity. We want to be looking at areas that owner-occupiers are predominantly in, because that's what entices people to an area. When there's a community that is solid, it's established, and then that's where the investors should come in, and that's where people actually want to rent. That's where you're going to get quality tenants. We also want to look at areas that are getting, they're not developing, but they're moving along. So there's job opportunities, there's more infrastructure. So anything, that's close to, like say on the train line, you've got a train station. So things like that really help because that's where people are actually going to live. So we want to make sure that we don't forget those things, because I think in a market like this, and I've seen it over the last few weeks, especially when we're starting to see properties with price reductions. We're getting multiple emails, texts, calls per day of agents contacting us being like, they've just dropped the price on this. Do you have any buyers? That's not necessarily the properties we should be chasing, even though we're seeing across the board, like there are price reductions. So I'm not saying because they're reducing it, we shouldn't be looking at it, but just because it's now a really good price doesn't mean it's necessarily a good investment. So we want to be making sure that those fundamentals are there. We've got the location, we've got the amenity, it's accessible, it's where people want to live, there is a demand. And then the property itself is solid. And that really depends on what your strategy is. But do you want something that's value add? You don't want to buy something that's going to be constantly costing you money, but tenant ready, but there's some upside to it if you can do a few renovations or little mini makeover or something like that. But we don't want to just be chasing something that feels like a bargain right now.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're active, of course, in Brisbane and Toowoomba. Now, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on Brisbane. We've sort of touched on that a little bit as well. But Toowoomba has been one of those massive markets. It's done really, really well in the last little while. I'm interested in your thoughts of, does that still have a little bit of a runway, or are we reaching a point where it's kind of like it's becoming maybe at the top of those affordability metrics that continue to drive that sort of owner-occ price movement?
Yeah, I think Toowoomba's moved rapidly. Even over the last 2 years, it's been absolutely crazy. So definitely a lot of growth in that area. I do think there's probably a little bit more to go. I don't think it's quite reached the peak. Obviously, Toowoomba saw a slowdown before Brisbane as far as investment went, which is just going to happen. However, I think the fundamentals are there for Toowoomba, and if you get the location right, it has a lot of convenience, a lot of amenity, accessibility is really good. You've got good schools, good hospitals, very much tied to like quite a few different industries, which means that, if one industry falls over, the city itself isn't going to fall over. So I think there's a lot of good things happening in Toowoomba, a lot of infrastructure. They've got, not that everything's tied to the Olympics, but there are Olympic events that will be in Toowoomba as well. but it is a city that's growing. So obviously it's a regional city, but it is growing. And I think there's a bit more opportunity there. I would say it's probably getting close though.
Yeah, okay. I only went there myself for the first time maybe 2 years ago, and there's a lot going on there. As you say, diversified economy. It's got quite a pretty main street. Just the landscape around it is quite nice. Those
beautiful
things don't necessarily drive house prices, but they don't hurt as well. So to finish us off, Jess, if someone's here listening and going, okay, well, it sounds like there's going to be a sunrise and a sunset no matter what policy changes we have at the federal level. I still believe in the fundamentals of property. What would your best advice for them to be? What we've got so far is obviously not chasing those bargains, the diversified economy, the proximity to lifestyle factors and transport connections like train stations and those sorts of things. Anything else you think we need to know?
I think it's in markets like this where there is uncertainty, there's confusion, it's what do I do? Am I going to make a mistake? It's go back to your strategy. So you would have put a strategy in place, hopefully, and if you didn't, do it now, for that investment purchase. So you should have a strategy. It should be very solid. You should know what you're trying to achieve, what the goal is, and stick to that, because that doesn't change. Like, yes, certain elements of the purchase may change. You might need to, pivot slightly within, with the changes that have been made, but your strategy doesn't actually change. Your goal doesn't change. So stick to that, understand exactly what you're doing. And if it is still the right time for you to get into the market or buy that next investment property, do that. Like, if you have the finance available, you want to purchase and you know what you're doing, go ahead and do it. Because these things, like if you're purchasing long, and you've got like a long-term strategy, it doesn't change too much. We see these blips in the market all the time. Like, even we talk about, we've had, 6 years of market growth. But 2022, we saw a drop as well. Interest rates started rising in May, and we saw a drop then. This feels very reminiscent of that, and everybody forgets about that 2022 market. So I think it's know your strategy, stick to it. Don't get too caught up with, everything that's happening in the media. Obviously, still be smart about it, but if you've got a goal, just go for it.
I love that. I think that's great advice. Obviously, if you understand the situation, it fits into your strategy. You've done the cash flow, and you know that you can weather any particular storm. At least from the two of us, we still believe in the long-term fundamentals of property. So, exactly. Jess, thank you very much for sharing your insights today.
No, thank you. Thanks so much.
Cheers.